Ancient China was a land of rigid order. Every role had a place. Every title was sacred. Men commanded armies. Women were expected to obey. Strength was respected, but only when wielded within rules. Break the rules and you risked everything. Silence was safety. Obedience was survival. Deviate and death could follow. And yet, during one of the most violent periods of the Shang Dynasty, the empire made a mistake. Her name was Fu Hao. At first, she didn't look like a threat. She entered the royal court as one of many wives of King Wu Ding, a figure meant for ceremony, ritual, and alliance. On paper, she was invisible. In a world obsessed with hierarchy, invisibility was supposed to mean weakness. But invisibility can be a weapon. Fu Hao didn't argue with generals. She didn't plead with traditions. She observed. She learned how wars were lost before they began. She noticed hesitation, misplaced pride, and how armies fell not from strength, but from indecision. While others relied on ritual, she relied on preparation. The Shang Empire was crumbling. Enemy tribes attacked from all directions. Soldiers were exhausted. Borders were collapsing. Victory was rare. Excuses were endless. The court demanded solutions, but tradition had none left to offer. That's when Wu Ding broke the unbreakable rule. He placed Fu Hao in command of troops, not symbolically, not ceremonially, completely. The reaction was immediate. Advisors protested. Senior generals warned of humiliation. Soldiers doubted. A woman had never commanded armies in this way. If she failed, it wouldn't just be a military loss. It would publicly expose the empire's weakness. And that's when Fu Hao was given a role no other commander wanted. She wasn't sent to win glory. She wasn't sent to prove equality. She was only sent where defeat was already expected. From that moment on, an unspoken rule formed in the Shang court. When an army was surrounded, when supplies were gone, when morale was broken, that's when they sent Fu Hao. And every time she was sent, one thing was expected: failure. Her first command was small, a force already written off as lost. Enemy tribes outnumbered them. Terrain favored the attackers. Experienced generals believed the soldiers would never return. Fu Hao studied the ground, waited for the enemy to overextend, then struck with brutal precision. She returned with prisoners. The court was surprised, not impressed. One victory could be luck. They sent her again. This time north with more men, worse conditions. The enemy knew she was coming. They prepared. They waited. Once again, the court expected her to disappear quietly into defeat. She didn't. She destroyed the opposing force in a single campaign. That's when fear replaced doubt. Fu Hao wasn't just winning. She was winning battles no one else could. Each campaign was harder than the last. And each victory proved she could turn impossible situations into complete destruction of the enemy. By the third campaign, she commanded 13,000 soldiers, one of the largest forces ever entrusted to a single commander in the Shang Dynasty. Not because the court believed in her, but because there was no one else left to send. The empire was watching. If she failed, Shang would fracture in full view of its enemies. She didn't fail. She adapted faster than anyone could react. She attacked when they rested. She moved when they hesitated. She broke supply lines instead of armies. And when the fighting ended, entire tribes were captured, rooted, or eradicated. Not defeated, not weakened, erased. Her soldiers didn't follow her because she was queen. They followed her because under her command, they survived. Victory rewrote beliefs faster than tradition ever could. Inside the Shang court, a terrifying realization was taking shape. Fu Hao wasn't an exception. She was proof. Proof that leadership didn't come from heaven. Proof that power didn't belong to bloodlines. Proof that tradition was optional. Her victories were no longer whispers in the court. They were warnings. The first time, she commanded 3,000 soldiers against an enemy tribe that outnumbered them nearly 2-1. The terrain favored the attackers. Experienced generals had refused the mission, calling it impossible. Fu Hao surveyed the battlefield, studied the enemy formations, and waited for the moment they overextended. Then she struck. Within hours, the enemy was in retreat, prisoners captured, her soldiers unharmed. The court was stunned. Luck, they whispered. They sent her again, this time north, 5,000 men under her command. The enemy knew she was coming. They prepared traps, ambushes, every possible advantage stacked against her. Most generals would have fled. Most soldiers would have surrendered. But Fu Hao, She moved like a predator. She struck at weak points. She misdirected forces, feigned retreats, then collapsed the enemy in a single campaign. Victory was complete. The court began to realize this wasn't luck. By her third campaign, she was given 13,000 soldiers, the largest force ever entrusted to a single commander in the Shang Dynasty. The mission was considered a death sentence. Enemy tribes had fortified positions, supply lines were cut, morale among her soldiers was low. And still, she advanced. Every flank was exploited, every overconfidence punished. Within days, the enemy leadership was captured, tribes scattered, borders secured. The pattern was clear. Every impossible mission sent her way became an opportunity to prove she could succeed where others would fail. Word of her campaign spread beyond the court. Tribes learned to fear her approach before the first arrow was fired. Soldiers followed her not because of orders, but because under her command, survival was almost certain. Generals began to realize what the court already feared. Fu Hao wasn't just winning, she was unstoppable. And still, the Shang Dynasty had enemies who refused to bow. A coalition of tribes from the west, the Kiang, were well-trained, highly organized, and believed that no one could stop them. They sent their best commanders, men with victories over hundreds of smaller tribes. They assumed a woman leading armies would be a weakness they could exploit. They were wrong. Fu Hao studied their strategy. She mapped every potential trap. She waited for the moment they overextended. And when the opportunity came, she struck. What should have been a balanced fight became a massacre. In hours, the Kiang leadership was captured. Their soldiers surrendered. Those who resisted were eliminated. Fu Hao had turned a well-prepared, confident army into dust without losing a single soldier under her direct command. Each victory followed the same rhythm. Impossible situations, overwhelming odds, expected defeat, and yet she returned with the spoils of war and the enemy's leaders in chains. By now, it was no longer the court that feared her enemies. It was the enemies who feared her. Tribes who had never faced the Shang ran at the mention of her name. Commanders began asking themselves the same question. If she can win against 3,000, 5,000, 13,000, what chance would anyone have against her in the field? The proof was undeniable. Her methodical, ruthless brilliance made her a living force of nature. She didn't just win, she annihilated expectation itself. Every repeated campaign escalated in stakes, numbers, and danger, and each time she returned victorious. Fu Hao had become more than a commander. She had become the embodiment of certainty itself. Hesitation and failure didn't exist where she was. And in a world that relied on order, tradition, and hierarchy, that was more dangerous than any enemy army. By now, Fu Hao had become a name that whispered fear across the Shang Dynasty. Tribes spoke it in terror. Generals avoided direct confrontation. Soldiers followed her without question. But the empire faced a coalition unlike any before, a confederation of northern tribes, battle-hardened and desperate, determined to crush the Shang once and for all. They brought their greatest warriors, hundreds of elite soldiers, commanders undefeated in dozens of campaigns. Their banners stretched across the plains, an army seemingly invincible. The court turned to Fu Hao. If anyone could stop this army, it was her. But this time, there would be no room for error. Failure meant not just defeat, but collapse of the Shang Dynasty itself. Fu Hao mounted her horse, her 13,000 soldiers arrayed behind her. The battlefield stretched like a living chessboard. Enemy scouts circled, attempting to anticipate her strategy. The northern commanders assumed she would attack frontally, the obvious move. But Fu Hao thrived on the unexpected. She divided her forces. Two-thirds advanced openly, drawing the enemy into predictable paths. The rest circled silently behind ridges, hidden from sight. She knew every step the enemy would take before they did. The battle began with a roar that echoed across the plains. Arrows rained down, horses charged, men screamed, chaos erupted, and in the middle of it, Fu Hao moved like a shadow, the enemy's greatest champion. A giant warrior taller than most men, known for crushing enemies with sheer strength, broke through the front line. Soldiers froze. Generals hesitated. This was the moment many feared. Fu Hao didn't flinch. She sidestepped the giant's attack, using his momentum against him. A twist, a pull, and the mighty warrior crashed to the ground, stunned. Within seconds, she had neutralized his advantage, turning what should have been the tipping point into a spectacle of precision. Meanwhile, her hidden force struck the enemy rear. Supply lines collapsed. Commanders were captured. Panic rippled through the opposing ranks. The tide turned so fast, even the most confident enemy soldiers could not adapt. Hours passed, but to those watching, it seemed instantaneous. By the end of the day, the Confederation lay broken. Thousands of enemy soldiers were dead, captured, or fleeing. The battlefield was silent except for the victorious war cries of Fu Hao's troops. She had done the impossible. The court erupted in disbelief and awe. Advisors who had doubted her watched their fears vanish. Soldiers who had followed her now worshipped her skill. And across the empire, whispers grew louder. Fu Hao was not just undefeated, she was untouchable. In that single campaign, she proved something no one could ignore. Leadership, power, and victory didn't come from birthright, title, or tradition. They came from one unshakable truth: certainty in action. Fu Hao had turned the battlefield itself into proof of her legend. Every impossible mission she had faced, every last resort army she commanded, had built to this moment. This was the apex of her unstoppable force, the day history would remember her not as a queen or consort, but as a living embodiment of power and strategy. By the sunset, the battlefield was hers, the empire was safe, and for the first time, even her enemies realized the truth. Fu Hao could not be stopped. Victory on the battlefield made Fu Hao a legend, but war alone did not define her. The Shang Dynasty was as much about politics as it was about combat, and in the courts of kings, power often hid behind whispers, jealousy, and ambition. Advisors debated endlessly, generals grumbled, and even some family members questioned her influence. She had proven herself in battle, yet tradition demanded that power remain in the hands of men. Bloodline mattered more than skill, or so the court believed. Fu Hao saw the truth. She realized that controlling armies was only part of leadership. To preserve the empire, she needed strategy off the battlefield. Subtle, calculated, invisible moves that would outlast any sword. She advised the king directly, guiding campaigns, managing logistics, and resolving conflicts before they erupted into rebellion. Every decision she influenced strengthened the dynasty, yet she never sought the throne. She understood the dangers of absolute power, even as it was within her reach. And then came the matter of her personal life. For decades, Fu Hao had remained unmarried by choice, defying the expectations of the court. Women of her rank were supposed to cement alliances through marriage, producing heirs to secure political stability. But she refused to be a pawn. She married not for alliance, not for gain, but for trust, a loyal soldier who would never challenge her authority or attempt to control her. The court was shocked. Some whispered that it was scandalous. Others doubted her wisdom. But Fu Hao's choice reflected a simple truth: her power was hers alone. Marriage did not define her. Authority did not require compromise of her agency, and her influence only grew stronger. Over the next decades, Fu Hao continued to command armies, enforce borders, and manage internal conflicts. She personally led campaigns, captured enemy leaders, and secured the dynasty's survival multiple times. Tales of her prowess spread across the empire. Tribes that had once been fearsome began to speak of her with reverence. Her soldiers called her the Sword of Shang, and even the king relied on her judgment above all others. Her legend reached far beyond the court. When the Venetian traveler Marco Polo visited China centuries later, he chronicled the exploits of a warrior princess who led armies, captured enemy generals, and redefined what it meant to be a leader. In Europe, playwrights and composers would later immortalize her story in works like Turandot. Though her real identity remained hidden, her spirit lived on. In Mongolia and across Asia, her name became synonymous with strength, independence, and strategic genius. Wrestling tournaments, oral traditions, and historical records kept her memory alive. Girls were taught that courage, skill, and intellect were not limited by gender. Leadership was not about birthright or ritual. It was about action, foresight, and the ability to influence events beyond the battlefield. Fu Hao lived fully on her own terms. She defied conventions of her era, survived decades of war, and wielded power in ways even men in her society could not. By stepping aside from ceremonial roles and embracing action, She proved that true authority was earned through skill, strategy, and courage, not inherited or assumed. Her story endures as a blueprint for defying limits. It is proof that heroism is not defined by gender, status, or tradition. Every campaign, every strategic decision, every act of leadership was a declaration of autonomy. Fu Hao showed that the impossible exists only until someone chooses to do it. She opened doors for all who came after, doors that are still opening today. And in the end, her life teaches one ultimate lesson. Extraordinary power comes from one simple principle: the courage to act when others hesitate, the wisdom to lead when no one else dares, and the audacity to shape your own destiny. Fu Hao died centuries ago, but her legacy lives on. Across battlefields, in the annals of history, and in the hearts of those who refuse to be limited, she remains unstoppable. Fu Hao's life is more than battles won or enemies defeated. It is proof that courage does not wait for permission. She showed the world that leadership is earned, not inherited. That strength comes in many forms, not just muscle, but strategy, foresight, and daring. That invisibility can be a weapon. She stepped into every impossible mission, not because she was expected to succeed, but because she refused to fail. Every army she commanded, every enemy she faced, every victory she won, rewrote the rules of her time. She could have been a queen in name alone. She chose to be a warrior in action. She could have accepted tradition. She chose to create her own. Her life echoes across centuries, across battlefields, across history books, across stories told to young girls who dare to be extraordinary. And here's the truth no one can erase: hesitation is the enemy, action is the weapon. Fu Hao proved that one determined individual can change the world. So remember this: the impossible is only impossible until someone chooses to do it. Act first, move with certainty, lead without permission, be unstoppable, because legends like Fu Hao aren't born. They're made by choice, by courage, by refusal to be limited. And that is how history remembers the fearless.